In this episode, we are talking to my friend, Dr. Kaz Hayashi. I met Kaz last year at SBL. He is an Old Testament scholar teaching in Minnesota. He was also born and raised in Japan. And so we talk about that in and of itself. You know, that's knowing the demographics of Japan. There are few Christians overall, and then particularly going into not just ministry, but academic ministry, biblical studies. So I wanted him to come on and share his journey with you guys a little bit, and for me to learn a little bit more about it. And then also we moved into talking about, in particular, he's done work on the intersection between biblical studies and anime and manga, and the overlap between the two, how they interact. And he's written a chapter in a book on how the Hebrew God Yahweh is portrayed in some anime or manga series as a tyrant and conflated with Western imperialism and even Nazi Germany and all of this stuff. So I wanted to just talk to him and get some context. I grew up reading and watching anime from Japan and reading manga series, and big influences on my own artistic training growing up were from like Akira Toriyama or Hayao Miyazaki. They hugely influenced me as an artist. So we talk a little bit about that and how Christians in particular can navigate the not just anime and manga culture, but in general, non-Christian culture, non-Christian entertainment. What are some principles that can apply to people who want to take their biblical faith seriously, but they also can see and appreciate artistic excellence, even when it's outside of the Christian faith? So it was a great discussion. It was great to see Kaz again. And I'm excited for you to meet him here at Disciple Dojo. If you appreciate these type of long-form discussions with biblical scholars, with authors, with people who I think are interesting and doing interesting work, then the best way you can show that appreciation, if you haven't already done so, is by subscribing. Tap that subscribe button, and there's a little bell icon beside it. When you subscribe, tap the bell icon. That just tells YouTube, we like this channel, we want to see more of it, and that helps us continue to grow. All right, sit back, enjoy this discussion with Dr. Kaz Hayashi. Dojo viewers, we are here with one of my newest BFFs. Kaz and I met at Every Voice Kingdom Diversity session at IBR/SBL. We chatted a little bit. If you watch the SBL recap, you've already seen him. And I said, we're going to have you on. And today is the day. Kaz, welcome to Disciple Dojo. I would love for you to tell viewers who haven't watched that video who you are, what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Well, Jam, thanks for the invitation to be on Disciple Dojo.
Absolutely.
It's such an honor and stoked about this.
Yeah.
And it's not every day that I get to meet another Christian martial arts lover. So that we've got that connection right there. Yeah. I'm Dr. Kaz Hayashi, and I'm the Associate Professor of Old Testament at Bethel Seminary University, located in Minnesota. I was actually born and raised in Japan, in a prefecture called Shizuoka, where the beautiful Mount Fuji is located. But
have you hiked Mount Fuji?
I have twice. The first time I had to give up after getting terrible altitude sickness, but the second time we totally conquered it.
You didn't need the little bottled oxygen or anything?
I did, actually, so I wouldn't get altitude sickness, because it was a church event that we started with, I think, like 20 people, and only me, my brother, an ex-military guy made it to the top.
Yeah, it's intense. It doesn't look intense, but yeah. From what I've seen, I have not even attempted that, but maybe one day.
No, it's a memorable event.
Yeah.
Right?
So sorry, I interrupted you, but I may do that because there's a lot of stuff I'm interested in about your story, and growing up around Mount Fuji is just pretty awesome. Yeah. So Mount Fuji to Minnesota, huge journey.
Yeah, in between, right? Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a Christian household, but, my faith really wasn't my own until I think like 16 or something. That's when I decided to follow Jesus. And at that time, I thought, well, I was very serious about my faith, fired about my faith, getting to know Jesus. So I asked my parents if I could go attend a Christian boarding school. So at the age of 16, my parents shipped me to Malaysia, where I attended a Christian boarding school
Mm,
called Dalat International School. Yeah,
okay.
so that was a wonderful formative period of my life. Got to be around other believers and, do worship, chapel. And I just remember when I was a senior, that critical point in your life that you're
Mm,
saying, well, which college am I going to go to? What am I going to study? You're starting to make big decisions about your future. I just remember praying and saying, God, I'm up for anything you call me to do. I want to go anywhere you tell me to go. Just tell me and, lead me. And that was the first time I felt like God was kind of tugging me into a full-time vocational ministry. I didn't know
mm,
what that would look like or mean, but I just knew that I needed to go study the Bible, right?
yeah.
So I started my studies at a Christian Mission Alliance school, formerly called Nyack College, located in New York, and I was studying pastoral ministry there. But I transferred out and ended up finishing my degree at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
back up for
that,
a minute. Let me let me pause. You went as a teenager. You grew up in Japan. You said grew up in a Christian household. That in and of itself, kind of unique in Japan. Per capita, there are not many Christians in Japan. And so, growing up in what did you have extended family that were Christians? What type of Catholic, Protestant? Give me. I'm super curious whenever I meet Japanese Christians in particular, because
yeah,
it's not the cultural norm in that
yeah,
country. So I'd love to hear
100%.
more about that.
Yeah. So for those viewers who haven't ever heard about a Japanese Christianity or know the situation in Japan. I can't remember which mission agency, but they would rank Japan as one of the most unreached people group or Japanese
Mhm.
people group in all the world, which is really striking, right? Because often we think of, I don't know, let's say the so-called third world countries or something.
Mm,
Japan being, such a famous country, historic,
yep.
very influential, powerful, to not be a Christian nation is kind of a shock. And the statistics always change, but I think they always say anything between 1% to 3% Christianity, and that's including the whole gambit of
Mhm.
Christianity, right? So not too many Christians at all.
Yeah.
The story of the faith in my family actually begins with my mother, because on both sides, my dad's side and my mom's side, we actually didn't have any believers, any Christians in our family line. And my mother was the first one who became a believer. And it's such a wonderful story because she was really interested in studying languages. She's a polyglot. She speaks French, Italian, different languages now. But when she was a junior high student, she was studying English.
Mm,
And when she went to her junior high, I think it's junior high, she met American teacher for the first time.
mm,
And she was eager to practice her English. She went to the English teacher and just had these conversations. And that teacher happened to be a believer.
mm.
And the teacher invited my mother to come to church, saying that there are other missionaries who get to practice English. Would you like to come?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beginning of it all. And through my mother coming to faith, her immediate family, her parents and my aunt came to faith. And of course, now my entire immediate family came to faith because of her, walk with the Lord.
Yeah.
So it's super exciting to
That's
see how God works like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cool. And it shows the impact too of one of family, of course, but also of language. Just the power that language has, and it's no coincidence at Pentecost that the church was birthed, the modern New Covenant church, birthed from people hearing the gospel in their language,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then that spreading from there. So the idea of like sending a foreign missionaries to convert the peoples, it's like, well, maybe, but just going and talking to them and befriending them
Mhm.
and living among them and
Yeah.
getting to know them, like if you're following the Lord, it kind of just is part of who you are, and
Yeah.
it like I think of it just it permeates rather than like I don't know. It's very very interesting to me, especially in cultures
Mhm.
like Japan where there's so few cultural Christianity. I feel like it, Japan is, Americans, we just sort of, especially back in the 70s and 80s, and Americans, they just lumped everything Asian together. So,
Mm.
like in martial arts circles, you would have, like, we even called shuriken the throwing star. They called Chinese stars. Like in
Oh,
America, they were called Chinese
yeah.
stars, and they're Japanese weaponry because Americans would
Yeah.
just kind of lump everything together. Well,
Yeah.
Japan's kind of done that in some ways with a lot of Christian elements. Like they'll lump in
Mm.
Christmas and Colonel Sanders, and like all of it just becomes it's very exotic in
Hmm.
Japanese culture, and so it just got to
Yeah.
get all meshed together and jumbled up. And there's there's got to be, I don't know. It's just the challenges are so different from a post-Christian secular culture to a
Hmm.
non-Christian secular culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
The what I wanted to ask you, getting back on track, there might be a lot of rabbit trails, but that's just because I enjoy talking with you. The You went to Malaysia from Japan. What was how you were there for high school years? Is that right?
Yeah. 3 years.
Okay, so just between Malaysia and Japan, what was some culture shock or some getting used to things about Malaysia that's different from Japan?
Oh man, Malaysia is radically different,
Mm,
than Japan. And I mean, I was on a very famous island called Penang. I think the island itself is a world heritage,
mm,
and it's a very developed area. They have the malls, they have a lot of things, but at the same time, you could see very developed, rich area right next to very impoverished areas,
mm,
right? So, for me, even seeing something like that was the first exposure for me because, I grew up in Japan,
yeah.
and, I didn't really see too much poverty, sort of say, right?
Mm,
And I actually went to Japan right after the tsunami. I think it was something called the Boxing Day tsunami.
mm,
And one of the first thing I did after moving to Malaysia was kind of relief work and picking up the debris caused by the tsunami.
mm,
So that was very impactful, right, for me
yeah.
to see these communities that were endangered, impoverished,
Mm,
terribly impacted by this natural phenomena, right? So that was very eye-opening. It was a very direct way that I got to connect with the people in
yeah.
Malaysia.
It,
Malaysia,
I was going to
we'll
ask you, is
say,
Malaysia, so I know Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world per capita.
yeah.
Is Malaysia majority Muslim? Or are they Buddhist or?
It's actually majority, well, it's majority Muslim, but specifically the island I lived in, Penang, was really interesting because there's one of the reasons why it's a World Heritage is because you actually see these three demographics come, really well together. It's the
Mm,
Brits, the Malay, and the Chinese who were immigrated there. So there's actually a huge Chinese population.
okay.
So you actually, because of that, see a lot of like Buddhist,
Mm,
Buddhist temples and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. But still, even Malaysia, I think it's illegal to witness to a Malay
Mm,
Muslim, and so because of this, right,
yeah.
evangelism or sharing faith was something that was, had to be done in a very sensitive manner.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So you left after school, graduated, and Nyack first and then Moody. Is that right? Or did you go back to Japan for a while before making that?
No, so yeah, it was Nyack to Moody,
Okay.
yeah, and that's where I did my undergrad in pastoral ministry. Yeah.
Gotcha. So now from pastoral ministry undergrad to Old Testament scholar, that's the next part of this journey, this odyssey that
Yeah.
you've been on. So how'd you make that connection?
When God initially called me to full-time vocational ministry, I thought full-time vocational ministry equals either be a pastor or a missionary, right? Because
Right.
that's how I knew people,
Yeah.
serving the Lord, without any regards to like maybe academia or what I call academic ministry being an option.
Mm,
But it was really at Moody that I took a class on the cultural backgrounds or the historical backgrounds of the Old Testament. And, at that time of my faith, I had like this really big frustration, right? Because I come from a son of a scientist. My father is a PhD geochemist who was a researcher. So, and I was always good at math and facts and all these things. So I always felt like, the Christian faith was, so spiritual, sort of say, right? And even studying the Bible, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who was a youth ministry major, and I was just frustrated with how if I go to church, it's all like dim lights, right? The atmosphere is all about it. It's
yeah.
all about the feel that you get with the worship and
Yeah.
stuff. And I was having an honest conversation with them saying, like, how can we discern God's will? Like, as we read scripture, right? Of course, we're hearing from God. I believe in the Holy Spirit moving in and through us and stuff. But still, like, I feel like there has to be a more tangible way to study scripture, right? There has to be something real about our faith that I feel like was kind of missing. And I remember his answer was, "Gosh, bro, you just got to feel it, man." And that was the answer I got. But in this class of the cultural literary worlds of the Old Testament, and I also took a class, I was taking a class on Hebrew.
Mm.
And that was the first time that I actually felt like this is it.
Mm.
This is the tangible thing about our faith,
Yeah.
that, God worked in real time through real people, and actually archaeology and cultural backgrounds can actually bolster our faith and help us interpret scripture, right? Understanding the Bible in its original language. And granted, I'm Japanese, right? So at that time, I would be watching anime, and sometimes I see anime either dubbed or having subtitles.
Mm.
And I just remember always having this attitude of like, that's not what that character said, right? That translation is wrong. And I'll be like, well, it's kind of right, but it's missing a nuance, right? And so for me, learning biblical languages, Hebrew, especially, kind of naturally was like, wow, this is a way into the authorial intent, or better studying scripture. Yeah.
I love that you said academic ministry. One, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it, because especially in low church evangelicalism that a lot of people in America grow up with, the academic is put in conflict with the just feel it, bro. Those two things. And it's seen as like, well, the spiritual people are the ones who are raising their hands and having this ecstatic experience in a church, and go by feeling, and the dry, dead, unspiritual people are the ones who are studying history and genealogies and all that. And that could not be further from the truth. The people because feelings come and go, and people who are so fervent, people I've ministered with in college, like we did campus ministry together, are not walking with the Lord now, 20, 30 years later, because their faith was just their feeling. It was their feeling. And when that feeling passes, or when something hits you and rocks you to your core, what's left when your feelings aren't feeling it? So I love that you did not settle for that just feel it mentality, but actually, no, this is real faith in real history involving real people. And the more we get to know them, the more we are getting to know the real God.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. So you ended up focusing on you're a Second Temple, right? Persian era as well.
Yeah.
That's your
Yeah. The post-exilic period. Yeah. So that
post-exilic. That's the
led,
word that I was trying to think of.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How did you gravitate towards that?
Yeah, so like I met my wife, which, she's a huge blessing to me. But I just remember once having like a dinner table conversation, and she just said, Kaz, can I be completely honest with you? I'm like, sure, hon, tell me anything. I just thought she was going to tell how wonderful I am. And she just kind of said this very bluntly and honestly. She said, Kaz, I don't know if you'd make the best pastor. And I'm shocked because I've spent my entire like college degree studying this. I
Yeah.
felt called to it. I was passionate about it. And then she said, like, Kaz, you ask questions that people don't care about. You love the Bible, you're passionate about teaching it. You're really great at it. Why don't you possibly just think about studying and teaching this?
Mm.
And that thought never crossed my mind at that point, but I just had this moment of like, yeah, I agree with this. So from my Moody, after I graduated from Moody, I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School to do an MA in Biblical and Ancient Near Eastern Archaeology, along with a MA in Old Testament and Semitic languages. And that led me to do my PhD in religion, specifically Old Testament, at Baylor University. And my dissertation was on the Book of Chronicles. Obviously, I study Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah, these kind of post-exilic books right now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I told you at IBR at the time, that's the area of scripture I'm the least familiar with. In terms of I say that's the weakest area, is that period. And so I love the fact that that's what you dove into. Yeah, and most people listening would be like, Chronicles is the book I read when I can't sleep, because it'll put me to sleep. But we've had Carol Kaminsky on, and she's talked about her work in Chronicles and trying to reorient people to get interesting about it. So what was you studied, that was your focus for your dissertation. What was the specific topic?
Yeah, I mean, like Chronicles is fascinating to me just because the reason maybe why people don't read Chronicles is because they say, well, isn't it basically a repetition of Samuel and Kings.
Right. They
And
sludge through Samuel and Kings, and when they're done with that,
yeah.
they're like, "Oh, finally onto something new. Oh my gosh, we're doing this all over again."
Yeah, you just
That's the
reading, you're like, this is
stereotype.
repetitive. Does it, what's different, new about it,
Mhm.
right? But I really feel like Chronicles is actually perfect for Christians to read because now, in a sense, Christians are reading records of the past and reflecting on events in the past theologically today,
Mhm.
right? That's what we really do in ministry and in Bible studies and pastoring, and that's really what Chronicle does,
Mhm.
right? So, in a sense, we should be able to really, I think, connect with the author of Chronicles and what the chronicler, the
Mhm.
author of Chronicles, is doing, just because the author of Chronicles is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The chronicler is reflecting on the entirety of Scripture. Actually, Chronicles is one of the latest book of the Bible, and in fact, we can see the book of Chronicles referring constantly back to essentially all of Scripture, including Genesis,
Mhm.
Samuel, Kings, and other, Psalms and different texts. So more or less, I actually say like the entirety of the Old Testament's theology and kind of content is summarized
Mhm.
and crystallized in the Book of Chronicles, which is a really beautiful way to think about that message.
Yeah.
So the question always was, why and how is Chronicles different than Samuel Kings, right?
Mhm.
And that's because I'm a archaeologist and constantly read the Bible in light of its ancient cultures. One question I had was, well, Chronicles is clearly historiography, right? It's rewriting or kind of retelling history. And my question was, well, how does the concept of time impact or influence how the author of Chronicles is portraying time and meditating on the passing of time?
Mhm.
And how is that reflected in the theological message of the book? So that was kind of what I try to go at in my dissertation.
Yeah. Do you think Chronicles should be in English Bibles? Do you think it should be at the end of the Hebrew Bible? Or do you think it's okay where it is?
Yeah,
Like if you were
that's
redoing the
the
canon, somebody's like, guys, we're gonna let you handle this one. Put Chronicles where you think it should go. Are you like, yeah, keep it
So
there?
my preference actually is so for those viewers who don't know, probably maybe they do know because you do such a good job, telling everyone. But the Protestant Old Testament and the Hebrew, what we call the Tanakh, right, or
Mhm.
Torah, is organized differently. And so a lot of people are shocked to hear that. And there's some books, right? I mean, Genesis do, you know the Pentateuch is the exact same sequence in place, but some books are different, including Chronicles and like Ezra and Nehemiah.
Mm.
So if you'd ask me, I actually think, the better organization is the Hebrew way, right? The way that is in the Tanakh. And of course, there are different ways why I think this, but I actually think that that kind of sequence and ordering is actually reflected even in like kind of what Jesus says at certain places in his ministry. So if it seems like Jesus is meditating on that kind of like um, that kind of sequence or structure, why not us?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about when he says the blood of the prop from Abel to Zechariah,
Yes,
and
yes,
that's a Chronicles event that's he's kind of
yes,
capping it off. Yeah, but then
yes.
you lose the counter argument. I actually agree with you, but the counter argument would be, yeah, but then you lose that Malachi page turn moment where it's like John the Baptist is predicted, then Elijah who is to come, and then boom, you turn the page and you've got that's the counter argument. But I think like I would love to put I think there's something about the Hebrew Bible ending with Chronicles that makes it more obvious that it's not just an appendix to Samuel and
Mhm.
Kings, that
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
doing
Like I
something on
said,
its
it's that
own.
entire culmination of the Old Testament history that's happening in Chronicles, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of a rightful conclusion in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And like that idea of like, well, that Malachi to Jesus moment, well, you can actually say the same thing even with Chronicles, theologically speaking, because Chronicles ends with what's happening with the Davidic kingship,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
This idea of like, God made a promise to David and his Davidic descendants. So where are we now and where are we heading to?
Right.
And comes Jesus, right?
Right.
So in a lot
Mhm.
of ways, I think um, having Chronicles conclude
Mhm.
um, Old Testament or looking towards into the New Testament still makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I understand why the Septuagint compilers grouped everything by genre. And I get it, but yeah, there's a lot of for viewers that are interested in this. By the way, there are English Bibles, Christian English Bibles that do group the books according to the order in the Tanakh, particularly Messianic Bibles. The Tree of Life does it. Complete Jewish Bible, I'm pretty sure, does it. There's also one. It's just the Hebrew Bible. It's called the Hebrew Scriptures. It was published. We reviewed it here on the channel a few years ago. It's the CSB translation, but in the order of the Hebrew Bible, and the book introductions talk about the ordering of the books in the Hebrew Bible. So it's intended for use for biblical studies students who don't have no Hebrew yet, but they want to kind of dip their toe in it. So I'll link to those in the video description. But yeah, I just wanted to ask you that literally just popped into my head, and I was like, well, you got a Chronicles scholar here, so ask his opinion. But you also said, this was just in passing, and viewers may have been like, oh, wait a minute, what? You said, yeah, I'm an archaeologist, so da 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 da. That's something that we haven't talked about, because I think some people might be assuming you're just Old Testament, you teach the text, but you actually do a lot of work like with things, with
Yeah.
stuff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, like I shared a little bit, like my dad's a scientist,
Mhm.
right? So for me, growing up, I actually said I always want to be a scientist.
Mhm.
Something I like the idea of testing something, theorizing, discovering, right? Something new, creating something new, having something tangible to work with. So that's always been me.
Mhm.
So I decided to get a master's degree in biblical archaeology, and since my master's degree, for the past 10 years or so, I've been going to Israel to excavate. Of
Mm.
course, there were certain years due to geopolitical situations I couldn't go, right?
Right.
But I've been part of different excavations, and currently I'm a staff member with Tel Shimron Excavations, led by Dan Masters of Wheaton College. So
Mhm.
it's an amazing excavation. I think when we started excavating, it was the largest unexcavated site, or largely unexcavated site in all of Israel, right? And the site actually is mentioned in the book of Joshua. So a really, really exciting dig. For those who are interested, there's actually our website open, and there you could even come and volunteer at our excavation.
What does that
But
look like? Let me ask you that, because I know a lot of people have talked about that, going and
yeah,
volunteering. And somebody's like, well, wait a minute, I don't know anything about archaeology. What would I be able to do to volunteer at a dig? I don't know anything. I'm a plumber or I'm a school
yeah.
teacher. Like, give me what's the pitch there? Like, what's the role for volunteers at a dig?
Yeah, so anyone can really volunteer, right? I mean, of course, you probably have to be like, there's certain age limits that you probably want to be like a minimum age kind of thing. But really, anyone can come. We have students volunteer, we have lay people volunteer, we have people that are a little bit elderly that come and volunteer. We have days where children can come and excavate and experience archaeology.
Mm.
So really, I think archaeology is open for all people. And of course, people come saying like, well, I've never done something like this. And the wonderful thing is, it's kind of like training on the job,
Mhm.
right? You're going to have other staff members like me, who've done excavations, that we can tell you different names of tools, how to use it, safety precautions, and we kind of learn things as we go, right? So at first, you can't even tell the difference between a rock versus a pottery, right?
Mhm.
And by the end of the seasons, you found so many pottery, ancient pottery dating thousands of years,
Right.
that you could look at it and kind of guess like, oh, that has to be pottery, and maybe even have the know-how to say like, I think it's roughly this period. It's amazing how much you
Mhm.
can learn there. So yeah, like it's anyone's open. I think volunteering is a very common thing. You can go to any excavation probably to volunteer, and there's really no specialized knowledge required to do
Yeah.
something like this.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
don't just hand you a pickaxe and a paintbrush and say, "Go find something." Like,
No, no.
yeah,
Yeah.
shown and coached. I know so much of archaeology is moving dirt, like
It is.
removing,
Mhm.
and that takes volunteer. I mean, you can't do that with a bulldozer. You have to do it with some precision, and so you have to have
Yes.
humans doing that. And so that's why there's so much to do, just being part of it. But all of these, like when I was just, we were, David De Silva and I led a trip to Asia Minor last year. And of course, he's New Testament archaeology. That's his jam. So we're
Mhm.
walking around, Ephesus and Laodicea and all these places. And we're seeing these amazingly reconstructed things. Then we'll go to a part of the site that's still in process. And it's just
Yeah.
like a minefield of scattered things, like pieces
Yeah.
of columns that have been dug up, because that stuff wasn't just sitting like it was for thousands of years. It had fallen over, it had been crumbled, it
Mhm.
had been dispersed, it had been recycled and used to build other
Yeah.
stuff. So the archaeologists, just getting the dirt out of the way, let them be able to then reconstruct. And this entire site now exists because of people. If you look at it as, well, I'm just shoveling dirt, like, actually, no, you're creating like this whole field of knowledge that generations are going to
Yeah.
be able to glean from. It's like people that do text criticism in the Bible. Like, you spend
Mhm.
8 months looking, is that an aleph or is that an ayin, or but the
Yeah.
result is an accurate text that people for centuries will be using.
Yeah.
So it's really like, if you can I don't know, I just want to encourage people, if you're interested in that, but you're like, well, that doesn't sound too glamorous, it's not
Mhm.
Indiana Jones, but it is like creating, it's incredibly valuable work.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. And there's nothing that can really describe the discovery of something that no one have seen ever discovered for the past 2 to 3,000 years, right?
mhm.
And often it's volunteers who get the first view of, uncovering some of these amazing artifacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's very cool. If people are interested, I think I'm going to try to have David on again to do an archaeology episode, like maybe getting
Hmm.
in a little more of that, and particularly New Testament archaeology. So maybe I'll wrangle you back into the dojo for some Persian era Old Testament archaeology. So I want to, you and I, we at SBL, we talked about things that we had in common. You had done martial arts growing up. You had
Yeah,
done,
I did karate growing up. Yeah.
and you were so good at it that your parents said, "All right, we gotta rein him in a little bit." All right, you were just beating people up left and right. No, what was you did karate and then you switched for more recently. You said you were doing kendo.
Yeah, Kendo. So
Mhm.
that's traditional Japanese sword fighting martial arts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So of all of the, I mean, kendo and kyudo are probably the least applicable, in your day-to-day life, because you don't walk around with a bow or a sword. So what is but yet kendo is a popular sport, or at least a popular practice for a lot of people. So what's the
Mhm.
appeal of learning something that people will be like, well, you do martial arts to learn how to protect yourself. You're never going to have a sword, uh, so why study that of the martial arts?
Yeah.
What's your journey there?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think there's different levels of appreciation of martial arts, right?
Mhm.
Maybe some people just want to stay fit, right? So it's good exercise. Maybe some people find that it's not physically healthy, but emotionally healthy to have a way of, exercising, striking something. Yeah,
Mhm.
there's that beauty. I think there's martial arts, and I'm sure you can tell, relate to this, like the beauty of discipline,
Mhm.
right? And I think different martial arts or fighting styles have different styles of, levels of discipline, but Kendo is extremely disciplined, right?
Mhm.
There's a right way to walk, there's a right way to sit, there's a right way to sit up.
Yeah.
And it's not simply while you're doing it, it's kind of it's almost philosophical in a lot of ways, right? Because you have to control your heart and your mind in stressful situations, right? You learn to respect your opponent, right?
Mhm.
Because for example, in Kendo, let's say hypothetically you won a match. You can't go like, yeah, I
Mhm.
won, right?
Right, right.
Hurrah! That would actually make you lose the
Yeah.
match
Mhm.
because it's considered disrespectful, right? Because by honoring your opponent, and whether you win or lose, you learn something. You
Mhm.
learn your weaknesses, you learn areas of improvement. So you always have an attitude of gratefulness towards your opponent. So that's a beautiful thing and a mindset thing too, and a heart thing. So the discipline aspect is wonderful. Of course, for me personally, as a Japanese person, I get to appreciate my Japanese culture and history
Right.
through doing something like this. And I think that is something that I really, really do appreciate. My grandfather, I remember as a kid, right, going to my grandpa's house, and my grandpa fought in World War II. And during that time, right, and obviously in World War II, you're not using swords, honestly, to fight,
Right.
but the sword, the higher ranked people carried sword as almost like a status symbol, right? So I remember seeing my grandfather's katana that he had during World War II, and just being like inspired and thinking like this is something that is kind of like symbolic of who he is, right? So I have kind of that personal attachment and interest in Kendo too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if your family has any samurai lineage?
That I don't think I do.
Okay.
So one thing I do know is that my side through my father actually were landlords. So they were pretty powerful people
Yeah.
in the area that my father grew up in. I mean, there's a huge cemetery dedicated to my family, but I don't think that they were samurai. Maybe there is somewhere, but I
Right.
haven't really looked into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cool, like in a culture. We're such a young country. America's such a young country. We a couple hundred years that very few people were even living in this area. And
Mhm.
now, but then you go to places like Japan or even parts of Europe or parts of Asia where it's like, yeah, there's literally thousands, tens of thousands, just all the way back. So much more culture and there people are more connected, I guess, to lineage in some places
Mhm.
than a lot of us in America because we're such a mobile culture and a
Mm.
culture of 99% of us are immigrant backgrounds. So
Yeah.
it's really cool the people that can trace their lineage all the way back. So Japanese culture. Let's talk about the other thing that we talked about, which is manga and anime.
Mhm.
So we both were into martial arts. I learned to draw. I literally I was an art major in college. I learned to draw from Akira Toriyama,
Yeah.
Dragon Ball, like and paint because he would paint the covers of all of the Dragon Ball episodes. And so I would draw and paint from this anatomy,
Yeah.
cloth, all of those things, folds of
Mhm.
garments. This was my first real lesson in that. Even though I read Marvel
Mm.
comics and stuff growing up, they were just, I don't know, they didn't grab me visually like Dragon Ball
Mhm.
did. Now, I never saw this or read this in English ever. So I never
Hmm.
knew the story or the plot. I just knew the pictures.
Yeah.
And only later did it get published in English editions. But there's manga, which is what these are. By the way, this is the final issue of Kinnikuman.
Kinnikuman.
I wish I could find this in English. If you ever come across the Kinnikuman set in English, please let me know because I'm looking for it. But this is what most people, when you go to a bookstore here in America, you see a lot of these volumes on the shelves. They're very popular at like Barnes and Noble or whatever. And you would think, oh, yeah, these are just kids' comic books like in America, but they're really not. It's a whole genre. So
Mhm.
give viewers who don't know, because we do have a lot of viewers here who have no clue about. I mean, we have a lot of nerdy viewers that are like, "Oh yeah," and they're ready to talk all about it. But then we have others that come here for Bible reviews and biblical teaching, and they're like, "What is that? And why should I care? And isn't it
Yeah.
demonic or evil or just culturally pagan or what?" So give us kind of an intro into manga in particular, because anime is just animated form of manga.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
walk viewers through that and why you've actually written academically on
Mm.
manga. And we'll talk about an article you wrote in a second. But for those who
Yeah.
are complete noobs, don't know anything about it, how would you introduce them?
Yeah, so I think a good way to talk about manga, right, is manga is basically what Americans call graphic novels.
Mhm.
So if I go to my library, and I was just there this past week, there's a graphic novel section. And in the graphic novel section, you will find manga like that,
Mhm.
right? So I think that's a good way to think comparatively about what manga is. So it tells stories, right? It's storytelling. It's usually fiction, but there's can be historical fiction, and there can even be like not purely like in these fictional categories. There's manga used for almost any category you can think of. They use illustration for dictionaries. They use manga as covers for really famous novels. So yeah, it's very common in Japan, right? It's a medium of storytelling, and Anime is short for animation, which is basically it's a style, right? And most anime that we see today are based on manga that are published first. So it's like, and when the movie says this is adapted from the novel of XYZ,
Right,
right?
right.
So that's a lot of anime, and anime usually is television adaptation of manga. Um, and when we talk about that broadly, I think hopefully people can think of like, well, that means that this is something that's, very common. And there's different forms of manga, just like there are different types of books, there are different types of movies, there are different types of TV shows.
Mm.
So maybe a lot of people who have never been exposed to manga or watch anything in anime would think like, well, they might have a set image of what a manga or anime is.
Right.
But I actually say like there's a huge range of manga and anime. For example, there are literally animations that are meant for, your toddlers learning how to wear their diaper, like change, wear
Mm.
diapers, use the restroom, like these educational things, kind of like Sesame Street.
Yeah.
For those people who think like, well, this is, bad storytelling, kind of thing, it actually isn't, because in manga and anime, there are many manga and anime that are adaptations of world literature. I remember watching, the reason why I knew the story of Tom Sawyer is because I watched an anime about Tom Sawyer,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
The reason why I knew Les Mis before I started my high school English class is because I saw an anime on Les Mis. So there are these world literature that everyone would unanimously agree as masterpieces that are retold in the format of manga or anime. So here it has tremendous even educational value, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. They, by the way, send me the link if you can to the Les Mis one, because Les Mis is one of my favorite books. I don't care for this
Yeah.
adaptation, the musical, but the book is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Most Americans were turned on to manga and anime in probably the mid to late 90s is when it started
Mhm.
trickling. I mean, it's always been here. Like if you grew up in the 70s and watched Speed Racer or Robotech, that's anime. That I mean, even the we mentioned this in the book club last night on Mission of God. I grew up watching Japanese animated Bible stories. I grew up watching
Yeah.
Superbook and The Flying
Hmm.
House. Those are Japanese animated Bible stories. And then there are other
Yes.
cartoons too. Like in America, it's called Adventure of the Little Koala. I can't remember what the Japanese original name was, but there was that. There were a number of like Nickelodeon type, Bell and Sebastian. There were some others that uh,
Yeah.
were were anime. We just didn't know it. They just kind of bought the
Hmm.
rights and played them on American TV. But
Yeah.
probably the mid 90s is when it started because of VHS and then quickly DVDs. It's you started being able to get more exposure when Akira came out, like that was sort of a big one for a lot of
Hmm.
Americans, their
Yeah.
introduction to it. But most of what got pushed, like especially in comic book circles, like comic shops or conventions, sci-fi, all of that Comic-Con type stuff. Most of what got
Yeah.
pushed was the action or strong like violence, like Fist of the North Star, or
Yeah.
sexualized, the whole hentai, just the gross
Hmm.
stuff. So it almost became this spectacle, like, ooh, that's what they're watching over there. And
Yeah.
and a lot of the just normal stuff didn't have that sensational appeal. It didn't have the
Yeah.
and so it just kind of remained over there. And in America, we just got the kind of extreme everything cranked up to 11, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then later they started bringing, with Toonami and other like when American networks started realizing, oh, people are reading and buying and watching this,
Hmm.
we need to tap into that. Then you started getting more. I don't know. It felt like it kind of evened out a little bit, but I think because of that, a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians, associate
Yeah.
anything anime with hyperviolence or hypersexuality,
Hmm.
and that's I don't know. That's a challenge. What do you like? What did or do you like or find edifying or interesting or fascinating in terms of specific manga or anime titles?
Yeah. So no, those are great questions, and I do think like that stereotype of anime as super violent or even possibly pornographic. Some people think like that. And for those who think like that, it is wise to know that something like that, it does exist, right? It's like even with movies. There's some movies meant for children, some for youth, but some for, they abuse these storytelling style or medium to do different things that are probably against Christian values. So I completely agree and understand that. But to think that that's everything that anime and manga portrays is probably not true, right? Like I said, there, or even you share Superbook, which is even adapted into a Christian American version, and was on, the Christian Broadcasting Network, was based on a Japanese anime telling the stories of the Bible, right? So it could be used for very good ways. So yeah, for those who have wholesale, like this is evil, like I just say, well, pause on that and just have a little bit more nuanced perspective and kind of give it a chance, right? What attracts me to anime? So anime is so, it's just all over the place in Japan, manga. You just grow up with it. It's almost like asking someone, have you ever seen TV, right? And probably 99% of Americans would say yes. So in Japan, if you ask someone, have you read manga or seen anime? 99% would probably say yes. And I don't think anime inherently is evil. People can do evil things with it, but it's not inherently evil. But there are several things or reasons why I think that it's amazing and why it's selling, right? Because I mean, if you think about statistic of books selling, right? I think generally book sales are going down. What's going up? Anime. With streaming services, almost every streaming services now carry anime, whether that be Netflix, Hulu, heck, Disney Plus started making some of their own anime, right? Based on Disney movies. So they're seeing that there is an incredible demand for this, right? So the question becomes, when I look at something like that, I do think that it reflects something that's beautiful and wonderful that attracts people about it. So I think anime, some of the reasons why people think it's amazing is because it's kind of it's a convergence of different mediums, right? Of course, there's incredible storytelling, right? There's of course, different anime has varying levels of storytelling. So some stories are not going to interest you, fine. But some stories are going to be fascinating, really well done, probably better than many novels or something, right? So the storytelling technique part is really attractive for people. And I just remember when I moved to the States when I was 10 for like 6 months, because of my dad's job, I turned on American cartoons and I was just shocked that they were episodic, right? I was watching like the Cartoon Networks and the different things. And I think many American cartoons back in the day were very episodic. You watch that episode, which didn't have any connection or hardly any connection with what preceded or follows, right? You can miss an episode, watch another episode, and it's fine. But that's not the case with most anime. Most anime has the story arc that it's building upon. So that was very different for me. So it further highlights the storytelling aspect of Japanese anime. I think people are they just love the artistic medium, like you said, right? In Japan, everyone, like at school, like when there's break time, I see people, kids, practicing their art all over the place just because it's so beautiful how and different of an art style that anime can have. So I think that is something that people are also attracted to, the beautiful art. And even with like, let's say sound and music, right? Some of the most famous Japanese groups, bands, play opening theme songs for anime. They're anime theme songs that I can immediately, identify today. So some great music that you're going to hear there. So I think there are these different sensory things that are, people will hear and be like, this is beautiful, wonderful, really exciting. And of course, for non-Japanese people, probably even these cultural, kind of like this, the unknown, right? It's something that's foreign that fascinates them about it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. But the for me, man, you talked about the music. One is I only heard the Dragon Ball theme song, the Japanese version. I
Mhm.
never watched or heard, and then when it came on in America and it was just like this rock, I was like, what is this? No, no, give me the chala head chala. Like that's
Yeah, yeah.
what is this? I don't know what this is. So like just that iconic, and there's a lot of American cartoons that are that way. I mean, they're about to release a new Masters of the Universe movie. Crossing my fingers that it's not going to be terrible, but I'm like, please play the theme song, even if it's just in the background. Play the opening because I grew up with the He-Man theme song, and
Mhm.
so for kids in Japan growing up with these it would really tap into nostalgia, where for American audience, it would just be like this whole completely new thing.
Yeah.
The one that does it for me the most, I've said this, the music that moves me more than any music in any medium, way more than any Christian music ever has,
Hmm.
are the Studio Ghibli soundtracks. Like the
Yeah.
score that Joe Hisaishi does are
Yeah.
unbelievable. I have YouTube playlists that are like 10 hours of jazz versions of Ghibli songs, or
Yeah.
just piano versions of Joe Hisayashi's scores, because
Hmm.
they're just absolutely sublime. They tap
Hmm.
into, and there's a channel, I forgot his name, but there's a music theory guy that analyzes pop culture and at his keyboard, and like talks about
Hmm.
the music theory and how notes resolve and chords or do what they're doing. And I don't know any of that, but I can watch his videos and it's just very fascinating. He did a couple on Ghibli scores,
Hmm.
and I was just like, that's why it hits me the way it does. That's why, because
Yeah.
it's the artistry in it. It really is
Hmm.
incredible. In fact, when I was in Japan last year, I picked up this book. I was waiting for a friend, so I picked up the Art of Nazca, and because this is my favorite manga ever. But the art in it, the world building and the storytelling, the watercolors, like this is all what Miyazaki did,
Hmm.
building this world that's like, to this day, like one of the most beautiful things ever filmed. And and it's just the artistic excellence of it. I think that's what, for me as a kid growing up who was training to be an artist, like I minored in Japanese for 2 years in college, because I was going to plan before seminary was to move to Japan and study illustration and come back and
Hmm.
be an artist. For me, what drew me to it was the excellence of the artwork.
Yeah.
And you watch an American, like the cartoons I grew up watching, everything is super cheap. It's like, okay, send it to Korea because they'll work for very cheap and they'll animate it fast. And then we get it back here and it's like spotty movement and the line weight varies. And you watch an old episode of G.I. Joe, which I grew up on and I loved as a
Hmm.
kid because that's all I knew. You watch it now, you're like, that's really, really bad animation from a craftsmanship perspective. And then
Hmm.
you watch an episode from like 10 years before that of a Japanese and like Robotech or something, and you're like, this is like a cinematic experience
Hmm.
versus a Sunday cartoon strip. Is kind of the comparison between America. So I think for a lot of people, that's what initially grabs them,
Yeah.
is even if it's weird, even if everybody's got crazy color hair, which is the irony because in Japan everybody's hair is dark, but when you turn on the the movies, it's like every color you can imagine. It's just this whole. It's like a visual. It's like a visual jolt, and some
Yeah.
people either react to it like I want to know more, or they're like, this is weird, I'm out.
Yeah. Hmm.
What would you recommend? Are there any particular titles or manga series or even from the past? They don't even have to be current, that you would, because I'm going to do an episode probably after we film this, maybe tomorrow. I'm going to film an episode on some things I would recommend for people like looking for things
Yeah.
to read that are illustration based.
Hmm.
What are some things that you would tell people? Hey, seek these out. Like I would tell people, get the Nausicaa box set of the manga and read it because it's amazing. What is something you would tell people, or what are a couple of titles?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question because I always say, the beauty about manga and anime is that the width of the breadth of themes,
Mm,
right? So for different people, different things attract them. Some people like sports, some people like martial arts, some people like piano, right?
mhm.
And there's a if you name a theme, there is an anime for it. There's an
Right.
anime about board gaming. There's an anime like my kids right now who are into ice skating. There's an anime about ice skating that they absolutely love watching right now.
Mm,
I grew up playing basketball, and there's an anime called Slam Dunk
hmm.
on basketball that you watch. So that's usually the question I always have to ask. But now, because I can't ask the viewers individually, like, what do you enjoy? How about this?
Yeah.
So let me just give you some broad suggestions.
And
For
some
those
that you
who,
enjoy.
yeah,
You,
yeah.
Kaz, I would love to hear. Go ahead.
So for me, I always think that an entry into anime should be a movie because if you do a series, right? Like let's say One Piece. I absolutely love One Piece, but that's over 1,000 episodes,
Mm,
and that's a commitment, right? So doing a movie is something a little bit more accessible for people, and that would be a good gateway or entry into anime. So for example, obviously any Ghibli film would be
mhm,
great.
mhm.
Particularly for me with Ghibli, I have to say that probably my favorite one is Castle in the Sky. Is that what they call it? Laputa in
Yeah, Castle in the
Japanese.
Sky, Laputa,
Yes.
Castle in the Sky here.
So
Yeah.
that one is something lovely. The art is beautiful. The music is
Hmm.
absolutely stunning, and it has this great story behind it. So that's one that I'd always recommend.
Hmm.
Um, there are other more recent titles that I think are really, really good. For example, there's one anime movie that came out within the past few years called Belle.
Hmm.
And if you watch it, it's Japanese modern retelling of the Beauty and the Beast story.
Hmm.
But I think, instead of you think like, oh, it's childish, kiddish, no, it deals with modern day themes. It talks about, difficult, like a kind of more serious themes about like abuse that might be happening,
Hmm.
finding your own identity kind of thing. It's a beautiful musical too. They have great music behind it. So Belle is another really phenomenal film that'll be helpful to get into. There's another movie that I just remember watching on the airplane, and I was looking for international films, and it says the English title Your Name, and the Japanese title is Kimi no Nawa, but it means your name.
Hmm.
And this had kind of have this a little bit of sci-fi element of like time traveling, but it's kind of like set in an everyday life for most people. And I thought that one had a really, really good storyline as well as, great visuals too.
Yeah.
So those might be some three films that I could recommend some viewers to try it out.
Yeah. I echo Kaz's recommendation of Ghibli films. I think Ghibli is superior to Disney in every way. And those are what, if I had kids, we would be a Ghibli family rather than a Disney family because they're just absolutely gorgeous. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's the opposite. I tell people, sometimes people are like, oh, are you into anime? And I always have to say, sort of. The stuff that I like is probably not the stuff that real people that are really, really into it like because it's more subdued, it's more like serene,
Yeah.
which is what the Ghibli films are, and
Yeah.
they're just more thoughtful. No, I don't want to say thoughtful because all of it, there's a lot of thought that goes into everything, but just they're more reflective, I think,
Mhm.
introspective, maybe. Like growing up, I can never understand episodes of Dragon Ball. We would get them. I was showing Kaz before we started. Like my friend would get VHS tapes from his friend in Japan who would just hit record in the afternoon when he got home from school and fill up an 8 hour tape and then send it over every month. So that's I never knew I didn't know the dialogue of
Yeah.
Dragon Ball or Ranma One Half or any of these that we were watching. And then when we would go to a bookstore in Atlanta, Iwase bookstore, and we would get the manga, but they were all in Japanese, so I couldn't read it. So for me, it was always
Mhm.
a visual. It was just a visual thing. And then when I read in English, I was like, I don't really. This isn't that great dialogue. Like I was actually disappointed when I could read it in my. Now that might be because the translation was bad. I don't know, but I just remember being like, this was more magical in my head before I could read what they were saying. Just as a visual
Well,
story. The jokes and the things that I thought were like they were a lot funnier when I was having to come up with the actual dialogue.
yeah.
You wrote so I mentioned an article you wrote. You talked about you have some video. I'm gonna link to your video.
Are you talking about
The
Hatsune
video,
Miku?
yeah, Hatsune Miku, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll link to that because you've presented that and you've written about it as well, and it's a whole
Yeah.
thing that people may I didn't even know that existed until I read your article on it. And maybe we can talk about that in a future episode if you come back. But the other one that I want to key in on is you wrote an article in a book, or you wrote a chapter in the book called Anime, Religion, and Theology, which there
Yeah.
it is on screen. And that one people can get it. It's an academic book. It's out there. It's academically priced. Just Keep that in
Yes.
mind. But there's a lot of different articles or different chapters in it. Your chapter was really interesting. It was Yahweh the Tyrant, the depiction and role of Yahweh in Bleach and other Japanese anime and manga. Now, I was unfamiliar, and I'm still unfamiliar with Bleach. I never read that one. It is incredibly popular, but again, I was reading manga when I was in middle school, so it's been many, many years. I'm well behind the times on what's popular.
Yeah.
But there's you talk about it there. You're kind of in the abstract at the beginning. I'll just read this part. You said, I argue that when Yahweh appears in Japanese anime and manga, the deity often embodies the notion of tyrannical strength that opposes the protagonist of the story. In this way, Yahweh becomes a force that must be overcome by the main characters. Moreover, I further suggest that Yahweh in these stories embodies Western ideals, monotheism, and imperialism, which go against traditional Japanese cultural norms and beliefs. And then at the end of that paragraph, you say, the history and the memory of Western colonization of Japan contribute to the negative portrayal of Yahweh in anime. And this is something I'd love for you to tell viewers a little bit more about, because for some people, maybe they wander into like, oh, I saw this Bible scholar guy talking about anime. Let me go pick something up. And they pick up Bleach and they're like, wait a minute. This is clearly the bad guy is my religion, and the soldiers have crosses, or the bad guys are associated with the cross, and the good guys are associated with, trying to overpower that. So what's going on there? Your thesis, your article, your chapter in that book. Give a nutshell version for viewers that will make them want to go pick it up and read more, I guess.
I don't explicitly say it in that chapter, but I feel like what inspires me to do some of these cultural analysis, right, as a Bible scholar, is based on like the very famous, theologian Kevin Van Hooser's work. And Kevin Van Hooser has written a book. I can't remember the title of it, but like basically what he proposes in the book is, for people. Bible scholars, theologians, to do something called like cultural exegesis or hermeneutic. And the kind of the tenet of the argument is, of course, we need to learn how to exegete and interpret the biblical text well. However, even if we can get meaning out of the text, biblical text and theology, right, God's truth, if we don't know the culture that we're speaking into, we kind of, there's a disconnect there, right? So he, in this book, there's different articles and chapters talking about the importance of doing cultural hermeneutics, interpreting the culture and seeing what it says in order to speak truth into it, right? So that was kind of my kind of starting point of it. And of course, as a Japanese, Christian Old Testament scholar, I'm interested in how Christianity is portrayed or understood among Japanese people, just because, like I said, the statistic is so low to a point to say that most Japanese people, if they hear or get to know a Christian or Christianity or the Bible, it's not probably through direct interaction with the Bible or a believer.
Right.
So where do they get exposure or influence about ideas about our God and our faith? Is probably through popular culture like anime, right? And I don't expect viewers to know Bleach, but it's one of the most popular animes out there. It's an incredibly popular anime, very widely circulated. So I thought that would be a good one to look into, right? In short, what Bleach is it's an anime about soul reapers. And what soul reapers are basically these kind of like, semi-divine beings, that capture and evil spirits, or defeat evil spirits. So they're the good guys, right? In order to keep the world safe, right? There are all these ghosts out there that they're destroying, right? So that's kind of the premise of the story. And in the final arc, because this is multi-hundred episode arc, the final arc of the story that concludes Bleach is something called the Thousand Year Blood War arc. And in this series, basically the ultimate bad guys appear to fight the Soul Reapers. And what I argue is these ultimate bad guys are more or less, what the author probably did intentionally or unintentionally is draw upon Nazi Germany, right? So they're essentially the Germans, and there are different reasons why I say this. They were, the SS, uniform. They speak German. A lot
It's
of the
pretty
things
obvious. It's on the nose.
yeah. So there's a lot of these kind of image and different things that they're drawing upon. And in contrast, the Soul Reapers are Japanese. They
Right.
look Japanese, their names are Japanese, their houses look Japanese, right? So, largely speaking, there is kind of like this good versus evil that is represented by Japanese versus what, just Western culture generally,
Right.
right?
Right.
And, one thing that Christians forget about is that how even Nazi Germany had strong connections with Christianity back in the day, right? So naturally, there's this weird religious connection made with these bad guys. And what I actually argue is the head bad guy, right? His name is basically a form of Yahweh, right? Because the God of the Old Testament, that what we call the Tetragrammaton, scholars have to think of like we think this is how it's pronounced, which we say Yahweh, but there's a different way to pronounce it because the vocalization was lost. But his name, Yuhavaha, is kind of a different way of pronouncing Yahweh's name. So what basically is happening there is basically he's an embodiment of Yahweh, named after Yahweh. His attacks are named, it's called Zenzijen, was it Almighty or something? I forget the
Yeah, you
English
render it
translation.
almighty, but then you say the
Yeah,
literal omniscience and
omniscience and omnipotence,
yeah.
right? Zenzigenno, so it's a theological term,
Yeah.
even his attack, right?
Hmm.
So in a lot of ways, there is like kind of Christianity embodied within him. So I see these, right? These themes of like, well, Christianity, bad guy, God of the Old Testament, bad guy, Japan, good, right? And so the question becomes, well, why? Why is the author using something like that as a trope? Right. And I don't think necessarily the author of the series is necessarily saying Christianity evil, we hate Christians, get Christians out, kind of thing. I don't think that's kind of like an explicit intentional message. But I do think there must have been enough things to maybe unconsciously or even within like the zeitgeist or the culture, right? The philosophy of the time that makes people or authors portray something like this and maybe the viewers implicitly agree or relate to. Does it make sense? So that's the question, what's happening there. And, from my kind of like theological historical reflection as a Japanese, it's kind of this idea of like, well, why wouldn't Japanese people view Western culture and specifically Christianity as something negative? Because, well, in a lot of ways, Japan has this history of being against Christians, right? Because the Christians came in, and I think it's a wonderful thing through Francisco Xavier came in, like Japan in like I think the 1600s. Christianity actually blew up, right? There was a really big revival that was happening in Japan. But because of the connection between Christianity and, imperialism it was just a thing, right? It was both a thing back in the day. Japan was wise enough to say that, these things are coupled, right? So we have to completely shut it down. Hence, Japan shut down as a country to most Western, civilizations and countries, and also made Christianity legal during that time. And there was an explicit statement made by the shogunate that says this Christian faith is against the Japanese gods or belief.
Yeah.
So
That was Tokugawa was the one who was it Tokugawa who made that one?
I think it's Tokugawa. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is kind of felt, I think that influence and historical memory kind of lives on today,
Mhm.
right? Because today, like if you ask a Japanese person on the street, do you hate Christians? Are do you think they're terrible? I don't think they'll say, I hate Christians or I want to ban them. I don't believe,
Right.
like, I don't think that's what they're going to say. Nevertheless, I do think that in a lot of ways, like this cultural historical memory and in a very realistic thing for like a lot of Japanese people trying to come to the Christian faith is that, well, a lot of the Christian practices and belief goes against fundamental Japanese like cultural historical beliefs and practices, right? For example, I often share about, how the Japanese national anthem is actually a worship song to the emperor.
Mm.
It worships the emperor as kind of like the semi-divine being. So as Christians, It's really difficult to
Hmm.
say, like, well, should I not sing the national anthem or should I sing the national anthem? And you can imagine this even in American context. If you don't stand up during the national anthem, you
Right,
make headlines, right?
right, right, right.
So as a Christian in Japan, what can you do about this,
Hmm.
right? Almost every national holidays are somewhat connected to Shintoism or Buddhism, right?
Hmm.
So it's almost like, well, being a Christian means not attending or supporting certain national holidays. So again, this is kind of like this idea of like, well, to be monotheist and believe in God seriously as a Christian, a Japanese Christian, means somewhat you have to deny yourself, deny your culture, and deny your nationality to an extent. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's something that in a Christianized culture is far less. No, I'm gonna take it back. It's not less prominent. It's more insidious for us. It's a little bit different. Like from
Mhm.
American culture or any Western Christian culture, I think there's a like an insidiousness of merging nationalism under the guise of Christianity, so that the two are
Mhm.
kind of together, God and country. Whereas it's
Yeah.
very explicit in Japan, in India, places that are like we have our national identity, and it is specifically not Christian. It,
Yeah.
it may not be anti-Christian, although certainly in India that's been the case with the Hindutva movement. But in Japan, I never got the sense, like you said, that people were anti-Christian, but they were definitely not Christian. So it's a different form of cultural pressure. I guess it's harder to blend in. You don't have cultural Christianity as much in Japan as you do. Like here, I'm in the South, the Bible Belt. Everybody, you throw a rock and you hit somebody, they're probably a churchgoer. It's just because that's part of culture. Now, whether they're an actual Christian, totally up for debate. But in terms of going to church, same thing in New England with like nominal Catholicism is everywhere, but are people really Catholic or are they just culturally Catholic? You don't get that in Japan.
So I
Um,
think in Japan they actually take that even one step further, to be
how
honest,
so?
like this cultural Christianity-ness, because Japanese people surprisingly like Christian customs.
Okay.
For example, every Japanese Christian, people, not a Christian, not even Christians, probably every Japanese celebrates Christmas, right? We like the Japan Christian practices. We just don't like your beliefs,
Right.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, and many Japanese people today prefer a Christian wedding, right? So
Oh,
we
I
like
didn't know that.
doing a Christian thing, right? Yeah, they like wearing the dress, they like going into the church, right?
Uh,
Kind of thing. So a lot of Japanese people would choose intentionally that they want a Christian Western wedding. So Christian weddings, celebrating Christmas,
mhm.
so those are kind of like the two big ones.
They
But
see it. Do they see it more at because you just said it, and I think that was very telling. They see it more Western than Christian.
probably,
I
yes.
mean, not that they would make a conscious dichotomy, but in their mind, I noticed that with like Ghibli films, like most Ghibli film, not yeah, I would say most have a very Western, generically Western feel. I mean, Porco Rosso, that was in the Adriatic Sea, so it's clearly the Mediterranean. But even like Kiki's Delivery Service or some of these others,
Oh yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
just generically what the towns are.
Yes, yes.
It's like a you don't know where, but vaguely European.
Yes, yes.
So I could see how that would also then be associated with, well, what do you have in those towns? Well, every vaguely European town has a church. They have
Yeah.
priests. They have.
No, that might be true. That might be true. Mhm.
So what then? How does that land with you as a Christian when you're navigating Japanese culture or helping others to navigate Japanese culture, whether it's actually in Japan or just Japanese culture from an international perspective, to help
Mhm.
navigate and discern? Like let's say they're like, I've been reading this thing, and it's like Yahweh, the main villain, is a bad guy, and the main villains are being associated with Christians. Or you mentioned another series that's about a witch, and
Mhm.
the priests and the church are the oppressors. I think it's set during the Hundred Years' War, and I mean,
Yeah.
they're very clear the bad guy. And I would see this in a lot of Turkish, like in Turkish films, that was the case. There was one that we always watched because it was so bad that it was hilarious and awesome. It was called Lion Man, and it was about this guy who was raised to overthrow the cruel dictators and set his people free. The dictators were Catholic crusaders. and he
Mhm.
was raised very Turkish among very Turk. So it was like you once you know the history of like the Crusades and how they viewed themselves versus others, then you start to be like, okay, I can see the themes that are trying to be put forward, and then
Mhm.
possibly engage in that cultural exegesis that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what are some things to keep in mind for especially for Christians reading manga or watching anime and taking in all these like this doesn't go with my faith. These kids are praying to spirits, or these are witches, but they're the good ones, and these
Yeah.
Christians are the bad ones. What How do you navigate that without just being like, it's all pagan, don't watch it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good important question, right? And I think there has to be wisdom. For example, my older brother, who is a missionary to Japan, a
Mm,
pastor in Japan, right? And he's Japanese, have children that are half Japanese. He decided the best thing for his family to do is to do the wholesale. We're not watching it.
mm,
Right. And for me, that's kind of shocking, to be honest. But some people, and I trust their wisdom and they'll, try to protect, their family or something. Maybe that's what they decide to do.
mm,
And if that's what you decide to do, I'd respect that opinion, right? With wisdom.
yeah.
But, I often don't find complete rejection the most helpful avenue or the way that moves things forward, for
Mm,
example, right? Because in my family, I do decide that, me and my kids can watch anime, but, that doesn't mean a wholesale you can watch anything and everything,
right.
right? It's, you don't give your controller to a 6-year-old on Netflix and say you can watch anything on there.
Yeah.
That's not wisdom. So something like that is, I think, important. And when you start watching, obviously there are going to be themes that will be probably against your faith or values that are portrayed because it's written by non-Christians to for non-Christians for the most part, right?
Right, right.
So inevitably they're going to have values reflective of the culture and its belief. So there are different ways to think about this. I do think there can be beautiful stories, art created by non-Christians
Mhm.
that's not about Christianity, right? When I go to museums, which I love, I don't always love seeing just the pure religious art. I can enjoy other art,
Mhm.
right? Kind of this idea of God has, reveals the beauty and different aspects, not only purely through maybe let's say these religious art or, through creation and different things. So
Mhm.
I think there's one way that you can appreciate anime or manga in that way. Second of all, I do think that, there is important things about this idea of having interested, right? Maybe this will plant a seed of interest in this
Mm.
culture and people group, right? I've met many people actually that, I've taught in the year saying Kaz, I feel like God's calling me into mission for the Japanese people. And sometimes their gateway was through anime,
Mm.
having a interest, right? Anime started an interest in these people for the people of Japan,
Yeah.
right? Maybe seeing these non-Christian themes made them realize for the first time, because sometimes as Christians, we really grew up in a very small world. We don't know what other beliefs are,
Right.
how other people live and things. This is a very vitally important thing as Christian to know in order to witness and connect with people, right? I think
Mhm.
it's important to know what other people believe, what other cultures believe, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes maybe that doesn't mean even our own Christian culture that we presuppose that is right, right? Maybe
Yeah.
we have to help assess our own beliefs and how we perceive other people and stuff. So I think having that open mindset, it can be very beneficial for anyone watching something like this.
Mhm.
Um, Third of all, something like this can open up avenues of conversation. I remember when I was a student at Moody Bible Institute, I took a class on apologetics, and we had to come up with different apologetic kind of, assignments to do and activities to do. And my one was actually watching Sento Chihiro, Spirited Away
Mhm.
with Japanese people. And however, Japanese people don't always even know their faith, their beliefs, right?
Right.
And I used that after watching it as a conversation started about, well, what do you believe, right? Do you agree with kind of these portrayals of the divine there?
Mhm.
Did you notice the role of this character, No Face, as, purely in the middle, right? And
Yep.
depending on if you're around good people or bad people could be influenced. What do you think about that? And, kind of, and through these conversations, we can say like, well, how do you think about like Christianity if that's the case, right? Kind of thing. So I think having something like this would give us even cultural intelligence about talking about it, but even find perhaps opportunities to talk more cogently about our own faith,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It reminds me of what Paul did when he went to Athens and, he's at the Areopagus and he's surrounded. And it says inwardly he's disturbed. And I think it used the word splachna, just in his gut by the
Yeah,
idolatry. But then he
yeah,
doesn't just start blasting away at the you morons. What are you doing? He
yeah,
starts by saying, what's the touchstone? Okay, I see you're very religious. I see you have a desire to know about these things. And I even
yeah.
see this monument over here to an unknown God. Let me tell you
Hmm.
about that unknown God. Like he uses that touch point. And I think that's a great the example you gave of No Face in Spirited Away. Folks, if you haven't seen Spirited Away, seriously, what's wrong with you? Like it's one of the best movies ever. My old Revelation professor, Sean McDonough, was on here and we talked about Spirited Away, and he shows it in his Revelation class
Oh, wow, cool.
for a number of reasons. He shows a couple of Ghibli things and some other stuff, but he said, but mainly I just wanted to show the train scene because it's the most beautiful thing ever put on film. And I was like, it is. The whole movie though, if you understand everything from like, just basic Shintoism, how the world is viewed, the whole concept of yokai and all of these spiritual beings. And if
Hmm.
you watch it through that lens, rather than watching it through a Western Christian lens of demons and God, and, like watch it through the lens that it was made from, and then analyze it in light of your theology. That's what Paul did at Athens, and I think it's a beautiful model of apologetic engagement with non-Christian cultures. Is first enter into their culture, understand their
Hmm.
culture, look at their culture through their eyes, then step back, look at it through the eyes of the gospel, and then you
Hmm.
will find things that you'll find coherence, and you'll find conflicting ideals. And the
Yeah.
key is to tease those out. So I think that's great. I think that's great advice for anyone. Well, cause we've gone about an hour and 15 or so. Is there anything that we haven't? I mean, we'll have you back on. Like I'll have you anytime. We can just hang out and nerd out. I do want to have you. Actually, I want to have you on to give me some insights into particularly Ezra and Nehemiah,
Yeah.
because I'm super weak in that area. So I'm just putting that in your ear. I want to bring you back
Yeah.
on, and I want us to talk about that
Of those
specifically.
books, I have no problem chatting about it. So yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's I want to have you will be the sensei in that episode of Disciple Dojo for sure.
I think these are great questions you ask,
Yeah.
and hopefully the viewers could say who've never seen anime or even given it a second thought to find like maybe there's something all important in this that or something that's helpful. I actually gave a talk about this about anime to a group of youth ministers
Mhm.
in the Twin Cities area, and they were basically saying we needed this just because so many of the youth
Mhm.
today are really attracted to it, watching it. And a lot of people, like I'm sure parents, adults, ministers, are like, I have no clue about it, right?
Yeah.
So I think even like a general knowledge could be helpful, and even relating to some of these teens that are watching it and stuff, right? There's an article that I maybe will write one of these days, but one genre of anime, because I said there's a lot of different genres of anime. One that's blowing up today is called isekai, and it's a Japanese word that means other world. But because isekai is so popular, I think they just added it to the Oxford Dictionary,
Oh wow.
English Dictionary, as isekai, right? And these are stories where a main character is teleported, so to say, or rebirthed into an other world, right?
Mhm.
And in this other world, they, either redeem their life or they can do what they want now that because they lived such a serious life. And I just think like this explosion of isekai anime genre is reflective of something about
Right.
Japanese people or the people today that are watching this. And I think there is this desire for the otherworldly the
Yeah.
desire for new life, the desire for, something that is, other than what they think, this evil, terrible world. And I think that's innate in us looking for the gospel,
Yeah.
honestly. So to see this longing, I think even something like that, that can be realized through anime, and perhaps like these can be conversation starters with your youth, with your children, with other people that might be interested in some animes like that too, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully, that'll be one last thought that I can, put in people's mind. Like, that sometimes even these, let's say non-Christian pagan, medium or art or stories can help us realize the need of the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm immersed right now in Lewis and Tolkien because I'm going to be going this summer to Oxford, doing a study tour of Oxford and Lewis and
That's
Tolkien,
amazing.
and it's that whole theme dominates so much of their work, is that longing for something that nothing in this world can fulfill. As Lewis said, the logical conclusion is that we were created for something beyond this world. And
Hmm.
and so being able to find and tap into that, and then having the wisdom to understand even every sin is distorted goodness. Like if something's super, like even the manga that's super hyper violent or hyper sexualized, that's a distortion. There's still a longing there. There's a longing for connection. There's a longing for adventure. There's a longing for not being a victim, but being able to have power.
Hmm.
Those are good longings. They're just distorted, and then
Hmm.
they're fulfilled in a way that's ultimately not fulfilling, and that it's
Yeah.
dehumanizing. So that's folks, look into this. Even if anime is not your thing, this applies to every genre of art, and particularly entertaining art that you come across. You can
Mhm.
apply what Kaz is saying to any, fantasy role-playing games in American context, or comic books, graphic novel, American Western comics, graphic novels, things like that. It doesn't have to be anime. The principles are the same. And yeah, man, I appreciate you. I thank you so much for coming and hanging out here in the dojo for a little bit. If folks want to connect with you, or wanted to follow your work, or maybe there's a church. I know a youth pastor friend of mine who is a diehard anime fan. I'm going to send him this link as soon as we're done. Shout out Mike Atkins. um I know there are others out there, and particularly people in ministry, if they want to connect with you somehow, and have questions, or maybe bring you in to teach or to speak or something. What's the best way that somebody can connect with you?
I think you can find my, account, my email address on my university website. So of course you can feel free to email me at, that professional email contact
Mhm.
address. For those who want to follow, me, I'm not super active on social media, but
Yeah.
obviously I have the X, formerly Twitter account. I have
Mhm.
Instagram. So, people can, look me up over there too.
Yeah.
So those might be ways to get in touch if they're interested.
Yeah. Well, I'll link to your faculty page for sure. And if they want to connect and reach out and pick your brain a little bit, or maybe bring you to come teach on this in person, I know that'd be really cool. So, all right, brother. Well, I appreciate your time, and you are no longer a Disciple Dojo white belt. If you come back on, you'll be a Disciple Dojo blue belt, because we follow Brazilian ranking system. But yeah, man, it's good to talk to you, and I'm gonna follow up about Ezra and Nehemiah. We're gonna have you on for that.
Oh,
So,
gladly, and I'll take the invite. So thanks for having me. This was a joy to talk about, just get to know each other a little bit more, and talk
yeah,
about, the work that I do and the importance of, considering these things.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, folks. Check out Kaz's work, and stay tuned. We'll bring you back. All right, brother. Take care, man. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Okay.
So again, I want to thank Kaz for coming on, spending some time with us here in the dojo. If any of this interests you, I'm going to put links in the video description below to some of the stuff we talked about. Check it out. Also, check out other interviews we've done here on the channel. And also, I have reviewed a number of manga or anime based Bibles here in our Bible review playlist. So I'll put those links in the video description below as well. Check those out, as well as the other stuff that we have here at Disciple Dojo. And again, if you appreciate any of this ministry, you subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, that directly fuels what we're able to do. So be sure to do that. We really appreciate it. And that'll do for now. We'll see you next time back here at Disciple Dojo. And in the meantime, as always, keep training.